This episode of the Caregiver Community is sponsored by Pace at Home. During this uncertain time, Pace at Home is enrolling participants who wish to continue to remain at home. Partnering with families, Pace at Home provides caring medical support for all of our program's participants. Visit us on our website or give us a call at 828-468-3980 to talk with a representative that can discuss with you the Pace at Home all-inclusive medical approach. Pace at Home is the champion for seniors wishing to remain in their community.
Welcome to the Caregiver Community. This is a place where we talk about the joys and the challenges of caring for our aging parents as well as caring for ourselves. I'm Frances Hall, founder and executive director of ACAP, Adult Children of Aging Parents. There are now an estimated 20 million adult children in the United States and many more millions worldwide who are caring for aging parents and loved ones and are concerned about their own life as they age. In this podcast, we are talking about benefits and eligibility for veterans and surviving spouses. Our interviewee is Brian Query. Brian is the Director of Veterans Affairs for Central County in Bellefonte, Pennsylvania. He is an accredited Veteran Services Officer and has been in his current position for 9 years. Hi, Brian. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Ready to talk a little bit about some benefits here.
All right. Absolutely. In fact, this is the first time that we have offered a podcast on the topic of veterans benefits and eligibility. So we are delighted to have you here with us, Brian, and appreciate all you do and all you're going to offer to our listeners. So thank you for being willing to help us with this information. So there is lots of information about VA benefits. So let's just jump in. There probably are lots of people who may not understand the details, just the basics of VA benefits. So first off, how would I determine if my parent or loved one, or even myself, may be eligible for benefits? What documentation would I need? And who would I contact to talk about benefits and eligibility?
Okay, let me preface this a little bit. A lot of the things we're going to talk about today are kind of generic things. And as you work more and more with the VA and stuff like that, there's always pretty much exceptions to every rule. So no matter what you kind of find out today or what you think today, you probably always want to go to some sort of a Veteran Services officer, somebody that's qualified to kind of look over, to assist with submitting these claims, because there may be something that's not readily apparent that they may be able to do that perhaps we don't get a chance to discuss today on this one.
Thank you. That's a great framework. Thanks, Brian.
You're welcome. So back to then kind of the eligibility for benefits. Pretty much in the VA, it comes down to, did the veteran or the person that served, did they serve for active duty time? Did they do a call up if they were in perhaps the reserves or National Guard, called up and maybe went overseas? Not necessarily did they go and maybe work for the state, but they were actually called up by the federal government. Then there's also additional thing if they were called up, and then did they serve in wartime? Because there might be some additional benefits for those veterans that served during the wartime. Additionally, then if they have any current disabilities or something that they can somehow link back to their service, okay, they may be able to qualify for some compensation for some payments. Because we're going to talk perhaps a little bit later both on what compensation and pension. So the compensation here is basically that they have a current disability that somehow they can link back to their service on that. And then wartime is, when we talk about the wartime, these are basically set up by the Congress, Congressional wartime. So, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and actually roughly since 1980, we've been in a Persian Gulf or a Gulf War scenario ever since 1980 through the present time frame.
Okay, so let's talk a little more about benefits. You've sort of alluded to this, but let's talk a little more about benefits that may be available for a veteran. What's available to the veteran? What's available to the surviving spouse?
So as far as the veteran goes on that one, so again, if they have the correct service time and things like that, so they may have what they call compensation. And that gets back to what I alluded to a little bit before, where they have a current disability that they can relate to their service. And it might be something that they have hearing loss now on this one. Well, perhaps they were a gunner, or they were in tanks during the Korean War or even World War II. Okay, obviously they were exposed to a lot of high noise levels. As long as they can then link their current hearing loss to that service, then the VA will pay them compensation. And this really dates back to during the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, when you went to war and you got hurt back then. Usually back then, if you got injured, you ended up losing an arm or a leg. It was pretty catastrophic. And so what the thought was is that after you left your service or served your country, you would get compensated for your capability or loss of earning power. So they would compensate you for that. And that's kind of then evolved into pretty much any kind of a service-connected disability, you will get compensation. And the amount of money we're talking here, at the low end, it's about $140 per month. And it can go up if you're rated completely over for 100%, over $3,000 per month. So it could be a pretty significant amount of money on that.
And Brian, let me just make sure I'm understanding. So the compensation then is in addition to healthcare services, correct?
Correct. It's actually, it is. I mean, actually, what would happen is if you get health care, well, if you get compensation, you qualify for compensation. VA by law is required to treat you to get in. They will treat you for that service-connected disability, and then they will also treat you for the other things on that. Now, if you don't have perhaps a service-connected disability, but if you have the correct time in the service, and usually we're talking active duty time, based on your income, you could get into the VA health care on that. And then, like everything, I have a lot of times that people come saying they want to get hearing aids from the VA. Well, to get the hearing aids, you're going to have to qualify for VA health care, and you can sign up for it. And they look at the income as based on your cost of living for the area you live in. So if the vet lives in a high cost area, they could have, again, they look at gross household income, and it could be over $60,000 that they could make and still qualify for that benefit to get into VA health care. And then there may be other services that come through the healthcare side as well. Once you get into it, you get the free hearing aids. And they also even provide some in-home healthcare where they actually pay for aides to come into the home and assist with the veteran. The key thing here, and we may talk a little bit about later, is pretty much VA healthcare is for the veteran only. It's not available, unfortunately, for the spouse of a veteran or the surviving spouse of a veteran. So the healthcare is just going to be treating the veteran and perhaps providing him equipment. Different things like that may be available for him or her, as long as they are the veteran.
Gotcha. Okay, so just to make sure I'm understanding, the healthcare is only for the veteran, and the healthcare services are tied to income.
If it can be tied, I mean, if they have a service-connected disability, they get a rating. The VA will treat them for that disability. They will get automatically into VA health care. They still probably will want them to put in an application, but they'll automatically qualify for it no matter what their income is. They have a service-connected disability, they will be into it, into health care. Now, if they don't, again, if they don't have a service-connected disability, they will allow the veteran to get into healthcare based on the income on that one. And they only look at income, they don't look at assets. So they would look at the kind of the gross household income. And one of the things I didn't talk about before, and I probably should have, they do correct the income for medical expenses. So if you have a lot of medical expenses, okay, they will actually, deduct that from your overall income, and that would get you into VA healthcare. And that a lot of times that becomes very key if you're a parent or older adult or sibling or spouse. If they're in an assisted living facility or if they're paying a lot of money out of pocket for perhaps for in-home care, even though they could be making, $60,000, $70,000, a year, they could be paying, five, six, eight, $10,000 a month for the healthcare, so that would make them eligible for the healthcare to get into it. And that might be something nice because if they would qualify, they might qualify for free medications or something like that, which may not be available, through their regular healthcare. And the other thing, a lot of times you can be in both VA healthcare and you can be in your regular procured Geisinger, Hershey, whatever you have, the different types of health insurance out there. You can have both. One does not negate the other. So it's always, you can use which one makes the most sense for you. You can use the one that's maybe the cheapest for you, almost like perhaps like a Chinese menu. You pick which one that's best for you at that time on that one, as far as who provides the service.
Gotcha.
Again, the key thing though with healthcare, it is healthcare. It's not health insurance. So primarily for you to take advantage of it, you have to go there and see a provider on this one. You're not necessarily just going to get a card you can take anywhere. So that's the key distinction between going to VA healthcare and perhaps having insurance through another provider.
Brian, are some of these fairly recent changes? And I'm asking that just because I can remember when I worked on college and university campuses that sometimes our students who were dependents of military families would have a card that was like an insurance card. So are some of these some changes
Well, again, there are just so many things. I don't think we have enough time to
to
talk
kind of all?
with everything. But in this case, that's why it's always kind of good to go talk to a VSO. I'm guessing in that case, if the veteran was permanently and totally disabled at 100%, okay, as deemed by the VA. So essentially, all their service-connected disabilities, when they rated them all, it made up to 100% total rating, and it's not going to get any better, and it's permanently and totally disabled. Then it's a little different ball game because now the spouse and then the dependents of that veteran qualifies for a type of actually health insurance. In this case, is called CHAMP VA. So there is some possibilities, where that they can get some health care, but that's a very specific situation, again, where the veteran was rated at 100% permanently and totally disabled on that.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. And that definitely makes a difference.
Yeah.
Um, you've talked a good bit about health insurance benefits or health benefits and health insurance benefits for the veteran and the spouse. Is there anything more that we need to say about that?
I don't think so. I think we kind of covered everything. Again, it's kind of hard to look at every situation and kind of anticipate what may be. And I kind of go back to how I opened this up. If you have, like I said, uh, as an older parent or even a spouse or a sibling, you probably just need to, they served in the service or in the military. You probably need to reach out to a veteran services officer on that one. Now, I'm here in Pennsylvania, and in Pennsylvania, every county has a veteran services officer, and that's pretty much nationwide on that one. So if you would go to your county uh, government offices, okay, they should have some person that kind of specializes or provides support for veterans on that one. You can reach out to them on that one. And then they'll probably ask you to bring some paperwork. And we didn't talk about this to a whole lot of extent, but if you have the paperwork like a DD 214 after 1950, the services all went to one type of a form on that one. Um, and that shows essentially when they went into the service, when they got out of the service, what their character of discharge, and a lot of these things determine what they may be eligible for on that. Now, if they were in prior to 1950, and generally we're probably talking World War II, they probably won't have a DD 214. Each of the services prior to that time frame had their own type of uh, documentation that showed when they went out, and they were their own specific type of forms on that one. And so generally you're looking for some form that shows, when the person went into the service, the date, when they got out of the service, the date, kind of how long that they served, okay, and also their character of their discharge, meaning that each time that they serve, they do give them a character of their discharge. And to qualify for just about all these um, benefits that we're talking about today, generally you have to have an honorable discharge on that. Now, again, there may be some exceptions to the rule. So if you do have one where you see it's perhaps other than honorable type of a discharge or something you're not sure of, you probably need to reach out to some sort of a VSO. Either it could be a government VSO. We talked about the county person, but a lot of the services like the VFWs, the American Legions, different service organizations, they actually have qualified veteran services officers. And, what does that mean? It means they go through training, they're required to do that. They have probably some testing, and they've been kind of working with these, and they're familiar with all the documents and what has to be submitted to the VA. The whole thing here, I tell everybody, the VA has a form for everything. So if you, more than likely, whatever you're going to put in for it, you got to come up with a form and develop a form. And that VSO will help you, fill out the form and submit it for you.
You just had read my mind, because I was just getting ready to ask you a few minutes ago. Now, how exactly would people find this person to help them with the Veterans Affairs? And VSO, just to clarify, I'm assuming that is Veteran Services Officer or Office?
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
Yeah. Just wanted to be sure.
Sometimes it gets a little bit, because I also, like a veteran services organization, you might hear somewhat, also. And that's, we're talking like the VFWs, American Legions, those types of groups. And then it gets a little bit confusing because they may have a VSO, working for them as well on that one. So, on that.
Right. Okay. This is really good information. Um, let's go in a little different direction. Does the VA have veterans homes? And well, let me stop there. Does the VA have veterans homes?
Okay, so technically the VA does not have a veterans home
As in long-term care?
as long-term care. Usually each of the states have their homes. So each state will have a veterans home, and the VA will probably be providing money to support those homes. So in addition to them getting money from their individual state, and each state I think does it a little bit differently of how they generate the funds to support them. You know what I'm saying? But they all pretty much get some money from the VA as a part of that. And what happens is, again, probably the best places to go if you're thinking about going into a veteran's home, usually a state VA home. And again, being here in Pennsylvania, I'm more familiar with the Pennsylvania ones. You know what I'm saying? So it's probably also under the state VA You know what I'm saying? You can probably look under your individual state, look Veterans Services for your specific state. You know, and I would anticipate it be a .gov, a .gov. You got to be a little bit careful too for some of these things too. As a little bit of a side, be very careful when you're going out there and just searching for something on it. Unfortunately, there are people out there that try to make money and take advantage of somebody that's doing that's trying to find assistance for again, a spouse, an older parent, or something like that. The key thing here is, okay, for these initial claims and everything like this, is that it's actually illegal to be charged for these. So if somebody's trying to say they want to charge you to get a compensation package or a pension benefits, which we probably need to talk about in a bit here, if they're going to charge you for that, that's illegal. Okay.
Good to
Number
know.
one, don't pay them. Okay. Go away from them. Go to your, county government or whatever. And if you have the option to, you might want to call your district attorney or the attorney general for your state and report them, because that's illegal. It's illegal for me as a VSO to take money for this. I'm paid by my county, you know what I'm saying? And all these other VSOs are either paid, through their county or their service organization that they're under. Okay, they're not here. There is a little distinction then if you go for an appeal and you're engaging a lawyer, then you may be paying for it. But as far as an initial claim to get the things we talked about here, pension compensation, do not, I repeat, do not pay for it. Okay. So,
That is really good information. Thank you for that tip, for that insight. Okay, let me go back to and let me also say, if anybody has difficulty for whatever reason, I can't imagine having difficulty finding a VSO, a Veteran Services Officer, in your area. But if you do, I suspect that Area Agency on Aging, which is in every community in the entire nation, your area agency on aging certainly should have somebody who would know who to refer you to. I'm not suggesting that the area agency on aging people would be the experts on veterans affairs, but they should know someone who they could refer you to. Okay, so let me go back to the veterans' homes, and that may be a misnomer. If so, correct my language on that. But my question is, what would be the typical cost of that, and how would someone even apply to become a resident?
well,
Or is that a
again,
VSO?
okay, so um, there's probably various ways that you can apply to it. You know what I'm saying? Again, I'm familiar again with Pennsylvania. You can actually go online in Pennsylvania, download the forms, and apply for it. Again, I also assist with it. Again, I'm sure that the VSO, your local veteran service officer, would be able to help you. Probably the AAA, local AAA agency would know how to do this and direct you for that as well on that. Now, as far as, that's what you could do. And then each state may have a little bit different type of requirements. They probably have residency requirements. But again, I'm sure they change from state to state a little bit on that type thing. In Pennsylvania, they want you to be a resident of Pennsylvania to go in to a home. But there's also a thing for Pennsylvania. If you were a Pennsylvania resident when you went into the service, you know what I'm saying? And and you were in the service for quite a while or whatever, and then you left, you would still be eligible to go into a Pennsylvania home. You might not be as high as a priority as a current resident, but you would still be eligible. But again, these are probably a state by state type of requirement. You have to really look at the individual state to see what their exact requirements are on that. As far as payments on this one, it's kind of a sliding scale. Again, I'm more familiar with Pennsylvania, but it's also different states do a little bit differently as far as how they have their money doing it. Because I think Texas has a fairly big money generating thing. I think they have some land or somehow they generate a lot of funds for it. And I was just kind of surprised. I was trying to help a vet get in there, and their cost was extremely low compared to what I noticed would be here in Pennsylvania. That said, generally speaking, at least again, my experience with Pennsylvania, and I'm pretty sure it's probably the same throughout the rest of the states too. It's probably going to be cheaper to go to a state veteran's home than what it would be to go to a civilian run, non-VA home. Because just think about it right off the bat, look at, they're getting some funding from, the state, they're getting some funding from the VA. Okay, so generally in Pennsylvania, and I'm pretty sure it's the same in the other states, so they look at your capabilities of what you can afford. So they do look at your income and your assets. They take into account, are you married or not, those types of things on that. And perhaps just like you may see too, under, older veterans, if they, or anybody, if they go in for medical assistance under, they can still go into a VA home, and the VA home would use medical assistance. So there may be some things that would happen then. Again, more familiar with Pennsylvania, but I think this is similar to the other states. And Francis, maybe you could correct me. But when you go to medical assistance, sometimes they do attach, at least in Pennsylvania, if you have a home or something like that, where when it's sold, they won't force you to sell it, but there may be some liens and some things put against that. And I think that's kind of, nationwide as well on that.
Gotcha. And yes, I do know that there are some scenarios that the house, when it's sold, then becomes the collateral or the payment, or whatever. But again, yeah, I think you're correct in saying that's something to check with the VA person or your area agency on aging, or even an attorney. Particularly an elder law attorney, to really understand how all of that works. You mentioned something and it spurred a question for me, and that is, with the veterans' homes, the long-term care, are spouses eligible for that? Whether the veteran is still alive and possibly is placed himself or herself, or whether the veteran has passed and there is a remaining spouse. Is a spouse eligible for residence?
Again, I'm going by Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, the answer is yes. Okay. And I'm assuming it's probably similar on that one. But what happens is, at least in Pennsylvania, they're not given the non-veteran spouse is eligible to go, even if they're a surviving spouse, but they're not as a high a priority as what a veteran would be. And at least in Pennsylvania, they limit the number of beds to, to what they call a non-military person on that one. So there only a certain percentages of the bed are available to them, because obviously kind of the priority is to have the vets there, on that. So what my point would be is there may be a longer wait time or something like that till a bed becomes available. Again, in Pennsylvania, I'm pretty sure it's the same. They have different skill levels that they provide, personal care up to skilled nursing care on that. So that all applies as well. And then, like anywhere else, they would just have to say, do they have a bed? Or they have the capability to meet your needs or the needs of the applicant? You know what I'm saying? And again, there may be some wait times and stuff. And obviously COVID has kind of really affected everything. In Pennsylvania, they actually locked down and weren't taking new people for a while. They are now. So they're kind of all working through all these post-COVID, or I guess technically we're still in COVID, but the high pandemic areas, kind of working through that as well. And the other thing I would probably point out too, and I usually tell people this too. If you have the opportunity to go to a state VA home, again, I'm primarily going to focus on what Pennsylvania does, but it's the other ones too. If you walk around and that, if you count the number of actual people that are employees working there, aides and nurses and things like that, there's a lot more, again, that are in a state VA home as opposed to a non-VA home because, again, they have more funds available to them and they don't necessarily have, I mean, I guess there are some are nonprofits, but even still they have to, they have to break even, you know what I'm saying? And some are, a for-profit, you know what I'm saying? So the push is to not have as many employees. So it's a different aspect. So sometimes it might be worthwhile for you if the place is open to go and compare, you know what I'm saying? What kind of care, would your, older spouse, or parent, or whatever, what would they get? You know what I'm saying? What value would you see for that on that one? So you might want to look at that as well.
And that's always something that we encourage is, and all of this comes back to sooner than later. To before you need the information, before you're in the middle of the crisis, to find out about all of this, find out about what are the benefits that my loved one, my parent, my loved one can get either as the veteran or the non-veteran spouse. What is available? If there is a long-term care facility, residential option nearby, what does that look like? How is that? How do you access that? Who is eligible for that? What is the cost? How is all of that figured? All of that. It definitely is. The earlier, the better. And to do it before you need it, to go on and get the information so you have that. So if you ever reach that point of we have to do something quickly, then you have that information.
Right. One thing that I talked a little bit about, I think I don't know what you want to question me, but we need to talk about what they call a pension, a non-service connected pension and things like that. So we need to delve into that a little bit, if that's okay, if we can kind of jump into that right now.
Absolutely. Please do.
Okay. So when I was talking about compensation and things, there was no discussion there to qualify for it as far as, any income limits or asset levels or things like that. So that was irregardless of what you would have. Now they do have, they call it for the veteran, they call it a non-service connected pension for the veteran, and then it would be a survivor pension or a death pension for the surviving spouse of a veteran. Now, in this case, here we get in, remember if I talked a little bit about there is a wartime qualifier in there, meaning that the veteran has to have served at least one day during wartime. Now, that doesn't mean the veteran had to be on the ground in combat. That just means during those specific timeframes as determined by Congress that they were in the military service. So they have to have one day. Prior to 1980, they just have to have 90 days of active duty. After 1980, there's some little dates in there, but roughly they have to have either 24 continuous months, or if they were in the reserves or the National Guard, they completed their full call-up period. Again, gets back that they were called up by the federal government, to go overseas to fight. I mean, this became pretty prevalent during the Gulf War and post 9/11 periods. You know what I'm saying? That they called out a lot of National Guards, ended up getting called up and going over to Iraq and Afghanistan and working, and being serving over there in the Middle East on that. So that component is in there. So they have to have some service components. Additionally, then they do look at income and assets, okay? So they don't count your home as long as you're living in the home and it's your primary abode and it's in your name or the veteran's name and spouse's name. That's not counted towards the assets, but other properties, savings, investments, and things. They do look at that, and the threshold is it's a little under $140,000 on that one. So that's the total amount on that one. So they look at that. So obviously, if you're over that amount, okay, then you would not be qualifying for that.
And the hundred, let me just clarify, the 140,000 is a $140,000 income, or is that
No, it's an
asset?
asset. It's an asset. Maybe I
Asset.
misspoke.
Okay. Okay.
This is an asset, okay? So we're talking, investments, properties, those kinds of things. But again, the house they won't count against as long as it's in the veteran's name, um, or the veteran and the spouse's name in this case, um, and those types of things. And then they do look at income. And the way they look at this, and again, this is probably something where you need to really go talk to a VSO. Hopefully, this is kind of just getting you, tweaked. Maybe we should look into this. You know what I'm saying? And the way they determine your payments it's based on obviously your income that you make, and it's combined gross household income. So it's both the spouse and the veteran's income. Okay, they count. And then the best way to think of it is that they will supplement you up to a certain level based on your medical needs on that. So there's a baseline needs, and then there's what they call housebound, and then there's a highest level for what they call aid and attendance level of care. And not getting into the specific, it just means that they need some sort of daily care, helping with, bathing, dressing, those kinds of things, activities for daily living, or they may need some custodial care because perhaps there's some memory issues, things like that, they can't be alone. You know what I'm saying? Or they can wander off, or they can leave things on and stuff like that. If they meet those requirements, okay, and they would be called for aid and attendance, and that would be the highest level. And so here, the amount of money, again, it varies a little bit depending whether dependents and all these things. But for like a married veteran, it could be up to $2,300. You could get paid additional amount of money. But the way they would look at that, they look at your income, but they end up deducting from your income your medical payments on this one. So if you're all of a sudden, if you're in a assisted living facility or skilled nursing care, and you could be paying, again, it varies where you're at, but probably somewhere at least $3,000 a month, and almost the sky's the limit, depending when you start getting skilled care, $10,000 or more, on that one. All of a sudden, you start deducting that from your income. You can zero out your income pretty quickly, and all of a sudden, you might qualify for an additional $2,300 on that one. A single vet could qualify for up to a little over $2,000 a month. So again, this is probably not enough to pay for the full care, but perhaps it's just enough to supplement, the veteran to make it now financially viable, where they don't really have to pull into their assets and to do that.
Or at least not dip in quite so much.
They,
And it sounds like what you're saying is to sort of pay attention that as situations change, that the benefits, the VA benefits may change.
yes.
And it sounds like probably upper or lower. Let me ask another question though, relative to spouses, because I'm sure that we have a lot of listeners that the veteran himself or herself probably possibly has passed, but then there is a remaining spouse. So how does all of this apply to the spouse? And is there a certain amount of time that people have to be married in order for the spouse to receive the benefits?
Okay, so a couple really good questions in there. Okay, so for the surviving spouse, but again, we have the same wartime and service requirements that we did for the veteran, So have to have served during at least one day during wartime, 90 days prior to 1980, or the continuous requirements and things after 1980 on that one. So as long as there's a surviving spouse on that. In general, the way the VA works this is that as long as you're married when you get when passing of the veteran, okay, you would be eligible for it. If you're divorced, generally speaking, and it's almost across the board for other things as well, that pretty much makes you not eligible for veterans VA benefits on that. That divorce kind of severs the eligibility for it. There's a few ways perhaps around it, but this is kind of general. You might want to talk to your BSO again, but probably more than likely, if your parents had gotten divorced on that one, the non-veteran spouse would not be eligible for any of the VA benefits on that. And then the amount of money, they're still looking at less than $140,000. That threshold is still the same. But the amount of money that the surviving spouse could get is around $1,300. So it's less than what the veteran would get. So that's the max that potentially could be there. And that's based on, there's quite a few medical expenses. It's deducting from their income, getting them below that $1,300, then they would supplement it up to it. Again, so if you would have, again, here in Center County, roughly the baseline level is about $3,500, per month to go to a personal care home. As long as the VA accepts that as a medical expense, then that $3,500 would be deducted. So all of a sudden, perhaps, the spouse is getting $2,500 a month, on that one. All of a sudden, but it's costing $3,500. So if everything works out, the eligibility and the income and all these other things, all of a sudden you're paying the $3,500. When they deduct that from the $2,500 that the spouse is getting, zeroes out their income. All of a sudden, they're getting additional $1,300. All of a sudden, you almost have enough to pay. At least there's probably other expenses, but you have enough to pay between her income and the VA payment that you're not having to perhaps delve into or pull out of her assets what to get. What I'm saying, as far as being able to keep him or her in a facility on that. One thing to caution, because I think you brought up a little bit of talking about an elder law attorney and things like this. The VA, does have a look back on this one. When we start talking about income and assets, so they have a 3-year look back. So if they're looking to somehow put things into trust or transfer funds or whatever the case may be, okay, the VA will ask you to verify if you did anything within the 3 years of putting in your application, okay, they may count that full amount of money that you transferred, that you perhaps gifted, or whatever the case may be. It may count against the assets to qualify for this benefit, this pension benefit.
I am really glad you mentioned that. Thank you, because that is really important information for people to have.
And that's true even for, again, it's a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, but even medical assistants, okay, I believe they have a 5-year look back. So
for Medicaid,
there may be some ways around it, but you need to really sit down and talk with probably an elder law attorney that's very familiar with both of these programs, you know what I'm saying, and can kind of walk you through the potential impacts of, transferring the home. A lot of times people, may want to transfer the home to their children. Okay, that's a transfer of assets on that. If you want to gift some money, to to a child or somebody to go to school, that would be considered a transfer, of assets. That would be looked at if it was in that 3-year period of time prior to you putting in for this assistance.
Right. And you're absolutely right. That is similar to the Medicaid situation. But that is, I think everywhere that still is a 5-year look back. That surfaces another question that really goes back to an earlier question, and then we really will move on. If you were talking about the looking at assets and looking at income and how it's the combined income and combined assets for various parts of this. If there are substantial medical expenses for the non-veteran spouse, not the veteran, but the non-veteran spouse, do those medical expenses become considered when there are some of these thresholds, the $140,000 of assets and those kinds, or the income? Does the non-veteran spouse medical expenses get factored in?
And the answer is yes. I mean, for the same thing, again, they count the full household income and assets, okay, on the one side. So fair is fair, you know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
they need to really count all the household medical expenses on that.
Okay.
So they would count against, and there's some cases where potentially the non-VA spouse may be in a assisted living facility, and the veteran, may be home, but the way the numbers run, you know what I'm saying, that they may qualify for some money through the VA based on primarily the medical expense coming from that non-veteran spouse living in assisted living or generating, high costs of medical expenses. Could even be in the home, you could be paying a lot of money for people to come in to provide assistance too. So it doesn't necessarily just have to be in a facility, but if you're at home paying out of pocket, okay, again, this is out of pocket. So there are some, long-term care insurance policies and things out there too. That's not looked as out of pocket. Essentially, they almost look at it as it's like an income coming in on that one. You could still be getting long-term care, you know what I'm saying, but still end up qualifying for it because, some of those, pay $100, or $120 per day or something like that. But, when you're talking maybe paying $300 or $400 cost a day, you're still, even with that long-term care policy, you would still potentially qualify for a pension as well.
Great. Okay. So all of this goes back to go talk to somebody who knows
Yeah.
your area. We'll just keep coming back to that.
Yeah, I think that's really what it is, because it's
Right.
it's hard to really sit here and explain it, in a venue like this, because then every person's different too, and there's lots of things that balls out there maybe that we haven't even talked about that would have to be looked at.
Sure. But at least what this will do is give people at least a starting point and some things for them to be thinking about. Let's go in our last few minutes. Let's go in a different direction, or a little bit of, or maybe the next step, and that is, what about burial benefits? What burial benefits are available for veterans and or spouses? And what about being buried at a national cemetery, Arlington or a different one? How does all of that work?
Well, generally speaking, as long as there are some requirements as far as, back to character of discharge and some service time requirements, things like that, that a veteran would be eligible to be in a national cemetery national cemetery on that one. And there's ones all around the country. Again, if you go to www.va.gov and dial in cemeteries, you can find them all over that. And they're actually run by the National Cemetery Administration, NCA, which is a part of VA. Now, the interesting thing of Arlington technically is not part of the National Cemetery Administration. It's actually run by the Army. Okay, it's a separate entity, and they are getting full. I mean, as far as if you want to do a full casket, and so they have some requirements and things to go there. Again, you would have to, generally speaking, you can't get a pre-approval for there. This, you kind of have to work with your funeral home to see if you could get into there, if that's something. And we're probably talking, at this point, you'd probably have to be a wartime and actually a combat veteran to get in there. I mean, on that one. As far as the National Cemetery, the rest of them, they're almost all open, on this one. You can get in. It's pretty much, the plot is free of charge. You know what I'm saying? And generally speaking, either the casket, the body, the cremains, you get it to the front gate of that location. They take care of everything after that. So I mean, there would be some embalming things or cremation things and stuff like that would have to be borne, by the estate or the family. But once you kind of get the cremains of the body to the front gate of that cemetery, they take care of everything on that. And then the spouses, can also be buried there. And even if they predecease it, most of the ones are set up, if we're talking like a casket, it'd be one on top of the other. You know what I'm saying? So what happens is the way they set those up that, obviously the first one that predeceases, would be buried there. And then the next, spouse that passed, when he or she passed, would end up going to the same plot, one on top of the other. That's how they're generally set up. Or they have like a crematorium type thing, like little locker type things that, there can be two go in there as well for the cremains on that. So no cost other than, you still have the regular funeral type things. I mean, they do services there. They'll set up services and things like that. They have times, so they, again, you have to, as soon as you kind of figure out that, that's something you want to do, you probably want to contact that individual cemetery to see when you can get it scheduled, on that one, work with your funeral home to get the transfer down there and work all those things out on that.
Yeah, I remember with my father's funeral that we had a very specific time frame that it had to be done during this time, but it was somewhat delayed after his passing, so that he could be buried in a military burial. And I'm assuming along with that, then again, if the family wanted full military rights, to the honor guard and all of that, again, the funeral home would be able to guide that.
When you're talking just, again, those types of things would be provided if we're talking not going to like a national cemetery, but just in a local cemetery. Generally speaking, most of the funeral homes, they end up contacting these service organizations. They kind of have their contacts and things. Now, the militaries do provide some of those, honor guards as well on that one. But the funeral homes, generally speaking, know exactly how to contact and who to take care of on that one. So they should do that. Again, it might be something if that's, again, you have to make the wishes known. If you know that is, to your parent or, or whatever, you might want to just double check. Most people know what funeral home they're going to be going to. You can just check with the funeral home and see what they have and kind of get an idea of what's expected and what you'll need to do in preparation on that. So you kind of just know what to expect to happen, what you will need to do. And sometimes, that's what the older, parent or whatever, they just want to know is taken care of, on that as well.
Right. This is all really good information. I'm going to close this out with going in the complete opposite direction for just a few minutes. Okay, My mom, my dad, my veteran loved one is doing fine. No problem at all. But we want to be prepared. So what does someone need to do? What can they do now before there is anything needed in addition to listening to this podcast? What would you recommend?
Well, it's paperwork probably. Okay. So key thing here is uh, if you can talk with them, or if they have perhaps a file set aside, when did they serve in the service? Do they have their discharge papers, either the DD-214 after the 1950s, or prior to that, each individual service, that shows when they went into service, when he or she got out of the service, or character of discharge, those types of things. So you want to have that available, as well. Know what that is. You're really going to need to know their finances, okay, on that one. And sometimes, some parents and people may be reluctant to do that, but unfortunately, having gone through this both personally, with my parents, and working with lots of vets here and families of vets here, that's something that really needs to be kind of understood on that one, where the different income, is, where their assets are parked, you know what I'm saying, what they have out there, because it gets very difficult to try to track some of these things down, either perhaps after they pass, or sometimes after maybe some memory issues come up. They forget where things are, type thing. Because there's been a few times that, I usually ask them to look at their look at their tax return, and all of a sudden I see in their tax return that they had this, $400 interest payment, from so and so, from such and such a bank. They say, "Hey, where'd this come from?" And because I said, "I didn't see any assets you provided to me." "Oh, I don't know." So they go to the bank, and lo and behold, they find a $400,000. This happened to me. Actually, I think it was about $250,000 account that the family was not aware of. That was just been kept there, type thing. So you just need to know that, because all these things are going to have to be submitted to the VA. They're going to want verification of these assets, of the income. And they do check with the IRS, you know what I'm saying? When that's what, so whatever you tell them on theirs, they double check with the IRS. So that's why you need to know that. And again, at some point for the estate and be able to figure out, is something that's useful to know early on as well, because you just don't know. At some point we're all going to die, but it's always good to know, what the assets and income and things were coming for those, your parent or your older sibling or whatever the case may be.
And even if you don't know details of dollars, to know where to go,
Yeah.
Where there are accounts.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Brian, this is excellent information. We have covered a whole lot of territory, but is there anything else that you think would be important for listeners to know?
Um,
Haven't talked about.
well, I think we kind of harped on this, but again, a lot of times I go and I talk, and I end up having to try to talk for hours. I still don't hit everything. So we've only really hit on the highlights of different things. So my hope here is that maybe tweak you a little bit. You know what I'm saying? Let's go, find my father's and my mother's, discharge papers. When were they in the service? Maybe you'll find some neat things out of some good stories from them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You maybe find out that they were in some major battles and things like that too, that they maybe were reluctant to tell you. They got some major awards and things on that one. But, but you need to kind of take all those things. Don't assume that they're not eligible for one of these things. Talk to somebody, a VSO or somebody else. Just get that double set of eyes and say, do you think, or whatever, and talk with them before that. Just don't automatically think, because there may be some things you can do perhaps that would make them eligible now on that. So
Good advice. Good advice and great information. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing such great information with us today. I feel very certain that there will be lots of people who will be listening to this and really better understanding what they need to know about what they need to know in order that they may best care for their veteran their veteran loved one or the surviving spouse of a veteran. Thank you also to you, all of our listeners, for joining us. We hope this podcast has truly been helpful to you and that you will share it with others that you think may benefit. Before we end, we certainly want to thank Pace at Home in Hickory, North Carolina, our sponsor for this podcast and all of our podcasts. We are indeed grateful for their support. This program is part of the Mesh network of online shows and podcasts. You may find more of our Caregiver Community podcasts on any of the platforms where you listen to podcasts, as well as our website, www.acapcommunity.org. While you're on our site, we hope you will take a few minutes to learn more about ACAP, our educational programs, and our local chapters. And if there are other topics you'd like to address as a podcast, please let us know. As we say so often in ACAP, regardless of our background, our education, our career, or anything else, when it's our mother, our father, our loved one who needs help, caring for and advocating for that person becomes very personal and extremely important. So please care well for your loved ones, but also remember to take care of you. Stay well. Bye for now.